Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Live with the Times. Grateful for all of you. Grateful to be here today. Today we are going over the seventh Aliyah of Vayeira. Vayeira. This is actually one of the most famous tales in all the Torah. This is a tale, call it a tale, but really one of the most famous sections, parts, stories of the entire Torah. The Bible, right, amongst the nations, also very famous part, what we call the Akeda, the binding of Yitzhak Avinu, the binding of Isaac. And this is the 10th and final test of Abraham Avinu, right? The sages differ on what the 10 tests actually were, but they all say that this was actually the final test, which leads to some questions there. And I think also this is sometimes the most famous stories, as we've seen already so far, are the most misunderstood, the most mistranslated, they're just a lot of details that are left out and things that just become kind of accepted by the nations and kind of seeped into as well our own tradition here in Judaism over time. And so we'll just kind of go through it a little bit, but a little bit, and we'll raise a couple of questions, and hopefully we'll find something in here as well that we can hold on to, right? So over here, it says that after all these things happened, right, meaning that Abraham dwelt in the land there. After all these things had happened, some time passed, and Abraham Avinu, Hashem said to Abraham Avinu that now is the time, call on him, and he says, go and take your son and take him to a place that I'll show you to offer him a sacrifice. Now, I think one of the main misunderstandings and misrepresentations is that Yitzhak Avinu was like a small kid, right? People think this. He was actually 37 years old at the time, right? Because people ask, well, how is this a test for Abraham Avinu? It's not a test for Yitzhak. You would think that for Yitzhak, it'd be even more test. He's the one that's going to be sacrificed, right? For Abraham, it was the test. For Yitzhak, it wasn't a test. Why? Because Abraham Avinu represented chesed. Represented chesed, meaning that he represented the aspect of giving, of ahava, of different kinds of terms, and kindness, right? Loving kindness. And he grew up in this place of complete debauchery, idolatry, where the common practice of the day was to not only give sacrifices, but really to sacrifice your kids. And Abraham Avinu was the one that stood up and said, no, like God is one, and God doesn't want to have you sacrificing your kids. If there's a God that you think wants your sacrifice of kids, wants your kids to die, or wants you to mess up your kids, or whatever it is, this isn't God. This isn't the real God, right? We're talking about the oneness. Who created all the gods? Who created everything? And this was Abraham Avinu's message of peace his whole life. And now to have Hashem to come and tell him that the time had come for him to sacrifice his own kid. Wow. I mean, the first thing could have been like, first of all, like, no. And second of all, like, how come all these things you're telling me not to do and all of a sudden you told me to do? It wasn't like that for him, right? It says that he saddled up his donkey early in the morning, right? Later on, we'll come and see in Parshas Balak that Bilam also saddled up his donkey early in the morning, but for what? So that he could utilize his power of prophecy or sorcery, or whatever you may call it, for profit and to go against Hashem's will. Here he's going to do Hashem's will, even against his own will. Right? And it says that he saddled up his donkey and he took his son and he took the two men with him. Who were the two men? The two men were Eliezer and Ishmael. Went with him. They went with the donkey. And for Yitzhak, it wasn't a test. Why? Because Yitzhak, as I mentioned, was 37 years old already. So, and he was Gevurah. He was the aspect of strength, of judgment, of strictness. So for him, he was like, whatever Hashem wants to do, this is exactly what it is. It doesn't matter what it before, and this is what Hashem wants. Excuse me, it's not an issue. All right, jumping ahead, but when he says when Yitzhak was biting him, he said, "Tight me tight so that I don't flinch, and God forbid I move, and you miss the mark, and I won't be a perfect sacrifice." He was ready to be sacrificed on the altar to Hashem, and it's a very, I would say once again, misunderstood story, because the whole point was, what is God doing over here? What kind of God is this? Or, the nations have all kinds of thoughts anyways. But he went and he saddled his donkey and took his 2 men. And one of the most telling times, or kind of revealing pasukim, right, is it says that Vayeira et zeitzei ha'olah v'yasem al Yitzhak benoi v'yikach biyado et ha'esh v'et ha'mechelet v'hu shnehem yaktav. Abraham took the wood for the offering, and he placed it on Isaac, his son, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife, and they went, the 2 of them together. And then what happened? That Yitzhak noticed, he says, okay, so he says, Isaac spoke to Abraham, his father, and he said, Father, yes, here I am, son. He said, okay, fine, so we have here the fire and we have the wood, but where's the lamb for the sacrifice? Abraham, Elohim, yireh lo haseh leolam, beni v'chush nehem yachtav. And he said, Abraham, he said, God will find out for himself what is the lamb of the offering, my son. Meaning, you're the offering. They understood whatever Hashem wants, and they went together. Right? And they had understanding this was going to happen. And it comes to pass, right, that at the very last moment, you go and they tie him down at the very last moment. Abraham's ready to go, and he knows in his heart that he's going to do it. It's not like, you're hoping they say, a Chassid once went to his Rebbe, and he said, Rebbe, how does a person get money? How come I'm trying all the things you're telling me to do for money and it's never going? And he says, well, because a person who's chasing after money or chasing after honor runs away from him, and money runs away from him. He says, well, what are you talking about? I'm running away from it. He says, yeah, but you're looking over your shoulder to see if it's going to come. And a person, if Abraham would have gone up and said, okay, I'm now going to do the thing that you commanded me to do, but he really didn't want to do it, he's not really doing it. Right? So he was really, really prepared. Right at that very moment. Abraham, Abraham, the higher Abraham, the lower Abraham, and the lower Abraham, and the higher Abraham. He says, yes, here I am. He says, don't do that to the kid. Don't hurt him. Don't move a muscle. Because now I know that you're Elohim, Ata, that you're a God-fearing man. You didn't withhold from me your son, your only one that you love. And at that point, Abraham raised his eyes and he saw, V'hinei ayil, echa, nechas bazbak bekanav. Ve'elech Abraham v'yikach et ha'ayil v'yelehu le'olah tahas benoi. So at that moment, he raised his eyes and he saw over in the thicket that there was a ram that had been caught by its horns. He went and took that ram and he offered it as instead of his son. Right, and actually that ram, right, that horn that comes from that ram, the shofar. Shofar, as we know that Yitzhak Avinu was conceived on Rosh Hashanah. He represents din, he represents judgment, Gevura. So Yitzhak, and we read this passage on Rosh Hashanah. We read it every day to incite mercy, but we read it especially on Rosh Hashanah to incite mercy. Say, look at what your holy people have been doing for all these generations. Right? And there's a very special part, like I said, that he, at this moment that he was ready to do this, that Hashem called out to him, a malach of Hashem, angel of Hashem called out to him, and he says, no, don't do it. Oh, wow, thought you'd never call out. And then at that moment, that's when he sees, he looks up, he raised, Abraham he raised his eyes, Vayeira, and he saw, behold, a ram. Wasn't the ram there the whole time? This is kind of like what we were talking about a couple days ago with Hagar. That Hagar had gone and she was praying, and all of a sudden there, behold, there's a well out of nowhere. And she's like, oh, wow. And the sages say, no, the well was there. It's not that Hashem created a new well. The well was there. Right? And here it says something similar, right? That Abraham, there's this ram that was caught. It could have been there the whole time. It wasn't until Hashem was ready to reveal it to Abraham that all of a sudden he perceived it, so to speak. He saw it, so to speak. So what's the difference here? Is there no difference here between the episode with Hagar and Abraham? Actually, let's take it a step further, because there's a earlier in the Aliyah, there is another part that also will come and redeem the two, or come and separate between the two. All right, where it says that Abraham arose early in the morning, took his donkey and his servants and his wood for the offering, and he rose and went towards the place God indicated him. But Yom HaShishi, on the third day that they're traveling, Vayisa Abraham Esainav. He raised his eyes before. What is this? Vaya et hamakom me'achok, and he saw the place from afar. Right? On one hand, it means that he went. The sages say that he went and he finally got close to this mountain. This mountain happened to be Mount Moriah. This is the place of the base Hamikdash of the Kodesh HaKodeshim, at the very place that Yitzhak Avinu was offered, and during the Akeda was tied in the Akeda. It's the exact same place as generations later the Kohen Gadol would come and bring the incense on Yom Kippur. Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Har HaBayis, the place where later on Yaakov would see the angels going up and down. Spoiler alert from a few weeks ahead. At this very place, this was where Abraham Avinu saw. He saw that there is a special place, Hamakom. Hamakom is also a name for Hashem. As we say, that the Hamakom should console you. Right? We say to all the mourners of Israel, Sion Yerushalayim, Hamakom may console you. Hamakom meaning Hashem, that Hashem is the place. Hashem is the ultimate place, the place, because there is no such thing as place other than Hashem. So we saw this place, the sages say, that was like this mountain that had smoke billowing from it. And this is when he said that he asked everybody, he asked the two other guys, hey, do you see that? And they said, no. I said, fine, you guys stay here with the donkey, and I'll take Yitzhak. Yitzhak could see it. The two of them could see it. They went, right? So it says, they went, God.The, they went together. So they both had this essence of prophecy that nobody else could see. But it's much more than that. He just saw, he went and he saw the mountain smoking. It was much more than that. I read this week that when he says Vaya et hamakom me'achok, it's not just from afar, meaning that he was standing off from a distance and you could see the mountain blazing up in the distance. It was meant that merachok, meaning that far in the future, he could see, he could perceive that this would be the place that the Mesa Mikdash would be standing. Here is a man who is coming to sacrifice his son, that Hashem had promised to him that he would be the father of nations, and that his descendants would come through Yitzhak Avinu, and that through Yitzhak Avinu would be the stars beyond the count of measure in the sky. And he was still on his way to go sacrifice his son, Yitzhak Avinu. And even though he was on his way to sacrifice Yitzhak Avinu, he didn't know how, but he knew that for sure that Hashem had promised him something, just as in the past, 50 years ago at this point. 50 years ago, because 37 years is when Yitzhak was born. And 13 years before that, maybe even 51 years ago, right? Because there's a year in between. 51 years ago, right? Where then there was a year that they were waiting, the angel had come. And this was 13 years after the original split of the parts, where Abraham Avinu had said, how will I know? Right? When you even have Ishmael yet, and then Ishmael comes, and then 13 years later after that, the blessing comes for Yitzhak Avinu. And now 37 years later after that, here we are. Somehow, Abraham Avinu knew that somehow he didn't doubt that blessing at all for one moment. He had made that mistake once before where he said, how will I know? And all the calamities, and he fell into a dark sleep, into a fear, and all the 400 years of slavery had come down upon them as a result. And Ishmael had come into the world as a result. He wasn't going to make the mistake again. He knew that for sure, even though Hashem was telling him to go up there and sacrifice his son, he was ready to sacrifice his son. He wasn't saying maybe Hashem will allow this man to allow me to miss out the sacrifice. He just knew somehow this will happen. And somehow there will be a Beis HaMikdash. And somehow it will be on that place that he was able to see it in the future. Right? Just as in the past, he couldn't see in his mind's eye how it was possible that he would be able to even have kids, knowing that according to nature, him and his wife had been infertile, God forbid. So he couldn't even perceive, couldn't even imagine, couldn't even fathom how it would be possible for him to have children in the future. He made that mistake. Now here we are, and he's got everything. Everything's in his hand. He's received all the blessings. He's received the blessings of Yitzhak Avinu. He's done everything Hashem's asked him to do, and Hashem's told him to go and go against all the things that you've taught the people, to go against all the things that you believe to be true, to go into sacrifice for one, your only son, the one that you love, the one that's going to inherit from you. And still at that moment, he knew merachok, that somehow in the future there would still be a Beis HaMikdash. Oy. And what does this mean to us? This comes to teach us, right? How many times that we don't know how things are going to happen? How many times we don't see how they're going to happen? And this is different from the time where before he had just believed that Hashem was going to happen. It was going to happen, right? And this is different from Hagar, who had prayed and begged for Hashem to help her, and then the salvation came. This is different because why? It wasn't just Abraham Avinu having emunah, having bitachon. He had that. It wasn't just Abraham Avinu praying and hoping for the best. He did that. So he woke up early in the morning to do what? To do chakras before he left. It was that he did the action. He put in the action that Hashem had told him to do. Even if it seemed as though the contrary action that was going to get the results. Even if it seemed, no, if I want there to be a Beis HaMikdash, that means that I need Isaac. And if I need Isaac, that means I can't sacrifice him. He didn't do that. He put his seichel aside and he went into the action that was supposed to be done. And thank God most of us, in fact, none of us should ever have this test of having to decide between our son, our daughter, and our blessings or anything like this. Chas v'shalom. Should all have healthy children, healthy physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, who are happy and healthy children in every way. But still, right, Abraham Avinu Not only did he do all these things, but he went into the action as well. He didn't went into the contrary action. That so many of us, right, our best thinking is what gets us in trouble, right? Abraham Avinu had known that his main problem had been he had given too much chesed. That the problem with Ishmael, why he turned out the way he is, because he gave him too much chesed, right? He had brought in so many neshamas into the world, so many people he had brought and made kiruv and brought closer to Hashem into the world. But still, he had lost so much because of too much chesed. And so Hashem made him, in order to help him curve his chesed, he made him go and do the ultimate gevuradik act. And that was to go against all of his nature, all his best thinking, and to go and do the opposite, contrary action. And this is what we have to go do so many times. This is what we talk about in recovery, right? That a person has to take the contrary action. Has to take the contrary action in order to achieve the goals that they want, to achieve the results that Hashem wants, to achieve the goals that Hashem doesn't even, that we can't even fathom what Hashem wants to give us. And yet, we should have in our mind's eye to be able to see it from afar and to believe it and to know it for sure that it's happening and to take that action to see it, merachok, to see and visualize it, how it's going to be, even though I don't know how it's going to be, because right now I'm doing the contrary action from what I think is the right thing to do. But my best thinking is what got me into my lowest places. And in this way, we're seeing really that change in action, change of thought, change in action, change of thought, that our thought is not what gets us into salvation. Our thoughts are actually what gets us into trouble. As it says right in the morning when we're davening, when we put on tefillin, right? That we say that it's a sign on our hand, or it's a tefillin on our hand and a sign between our eyes. And why do we touch the arm first and then the head second? Or we say the arm first and the head second for those who don't touch and kiss. It's because we have to do the action before we can change our thoughts. You can't think your way out of your situations. You have to act your way out of situations. You have to put in the work. And in this way, you're seeing the progress, the slow but steady progress. Can't be done in one day where you're cramming and doing all the stuff that you've been meaning to do, and you do it in one day. Right? It says, what's better, to do tzedakah and to give a lot of tzedakah at once, or to give a little tzedakah here and there? It says to give a little tzedakah here and there. Why? Because you're training yourself to give tzedakah. Not anybody, but it's easier for a person to write one big check and to get a bunch of recognition than to write a bunch of little checks. To write one $10,000 check, or just give a bunch of $10 away 1,000 times. Right? So Hashem should bless us to be able to do the action, the contrary action that Hashem wants us to do consistently, to go away from what we think is our best thinking, but that's really just our short-minded, mochen the katnus thinking. And to go and enter a new world by acting our way into it, by taking the actions, the contrary action, and this way opening up a mochen the gadlus, a big consciousness that we don't even know happens, don't even know exists. And in this way, we're going to have the mochen the gadlus that can see and perceive the future, merachok, from afar, and to know that for sure it's there. I just have to get there. How do I get there? To do these actions. And in this way, we're all going to achieve our goals in the way of Hashem, that we're all going to achieve what we need to achieve by doing the contrary action, every single one of us, and taking one step at a time, every single moment at a time, to retrain our brain. And this way, we're going to see that we all achieve our salvations individually, and we all lead to our salvations collectively. The Geula Shlema, the Beis HaMikdash that is there, that perception that Abraham Avinu saw, then will come true here now. Come Moshiach Sidkeinu, with the true Geula of Abraham Avinu's children, all of them, in the entire world. B'Shalom, Amen. Ken Yirat Soin.